Good morning, boys and girls. Actually, good afternoon, boys and girls. This is Miss Cassandra again, and we're going to talk about how things were different 100 years ago. Now, the thing about 100 years ago, there was no running water. So, people took a bath mainly about once a week. Women washed their hair about once a month. Can you imagine how dirty and stinky people were back then? But it didn't matter because nobody really cared about what people smelled like. I'm still going by candle because 100 years ago, not everybody had electricity. It was a luxury if you had a toilet. People used to use an outhouse, and what an outhouse is, it's sort of like a building that they use outside. The best example I could use today of what an outhouse is like a porta potty. You know, if you go to a parade, like the Mardi Gras parades that we had about a month and a half ago, the parades, they had these little porta potties, and you open the door and there's a toilet, but there's other people's pee and poo in there, and it smells. It doesn't smell too good, and it's nasty. It's really nasty. Well, that's what an outhouse was. What they would do was they would go out and they would dig a hole in the ground, and then they would put a seat on top of that hole, and people would go in the outhouse, and then they would either go pee or poo. But you couldn't wash your hands afterwards because there was no running water. There was also, like we said, very few people had electricity. So without electricity, there's no lights. There was no TVs, no iPads, no cell phones, nothing like that. The internet wasn't invented until about 90 years later. Now, what made it really hard was, how do you get water if there's no running water? People had wells. They would dig in the ground, and under the ground there's water, but you have to dig kind of far. And they would build a well, and then they would pump the water. There was like this little hand pump, and then they would pump and pump and pump, and it would suck the water out from the ground. It wasn't exactly. Can I borrow one of your water bottles? It wasn't exactly like the water that we see here. It was more of the water that you see in the bayou. And that's how they would get their water. They would take a bath like this, but it wasn't hot water. They would take buckets of water, fill up a bath, and just wash off as they can. And a lot of times they made their own soap. Thank you. Now, there was no washing machines or dryers either. What they would do is, it was basically every Monday, the women that would be their chore of the week. They would wash their clothes. But they would wash it with a washboard. And a washboard, it's about this big, and it looks like bumps on it, and it's made out of metal. And then they would take their clothes, dip it in the water, dip it in soap, and scrub and scrub and scrub. Then they would rinse out all of the soap, and then they would hang their clothes to dry. It would take all day to do this. Luckily, today we have washer and dryers that helps clean our clothes. Also, back then, most of the women sewed their clothes by hand. Now, a couple of things that they had back then was that we still have today. Baby Ruth candy bars. They had Baby Ruth candy bars 100 years ago. They also had Yoo-Hoo chocolate. My little girl loves Yoo-Hoo chocolate. Yoo-Hoo chocolate was around 100 years ago. Also, Kool-Aid. Who would have known Kool-Aid was 100 years ago? Grape jelly. Oh, and one of my other little girls' favorite, Reese's peanut butter cups. They've been around for a long time. Also, Peter Pan peanut butter. That's been around. So tomorrow we're gonna discuss more things. Oh, before I let y'all go, because I see in my notes there was a couple of things I wanted to talk about. The medicine. The whole reason Miss Cassandra is doing these videos is because we have a disease called the coronavirus. It's a pandemic. That means it's spread out around the world. It's not just in our area. 100 years ago, there was another pandemic. It was called the Spanish flu. And this killed about 50 million people worldwide. Now, 100 years ago, they didn't have the medical advances that we have nowadays. Women only lived to be about 54 years old. And one of the things they did was they thought that if you were sick, they thought that you had too much blood. And they had a difference between bad blood. They thought there was a difference between bad blood and good blood. So sometimes the doctors would cut people and let them bleed, or other times they would put leeches, which is this little, how would you describe it? A bug?
It's not a bug. It lives in water.
It lives in water. Some sort of animal. It attaches to you, and it numbs the area, and then it starts sucking out blood. They would purposely put these leeches on people so that way to make them better. There's also, when you go to a doctor and you're sick, they give you antibiotics. And antibiotics helps kill bacteria that's in your system. 100 years ago, there was no such thing as antibiotics. Penicillin, which is the most common antibiotic that is used today, wasn't used until 80 years ago in the 1940s. All right, quick thing, I'm going to do a quick review with our number of the month, which is, remember, the number 9. Color of the month is yellow. And our shape of the month is oval. And finally, letter of the week is letter X. I will see y'all tomorrow. Have a good day. Bye.